From western Norway to the mainland of Orkney is a distance of 266 miles, an easy journey for a Viking longboat. Finding the islands good for cultivation, the Vikings became settlers. Today, these wonderfully green islands are occupied by owner farmers, descendants of those who survived the bad farming times of the 1920s, 30s. The land here is so good that it can support one cow to an acre, and there is a creamery in Kirkwall to take the milk. Ian Scott, who farms redland, is one of the most progressive on high and low ground. He talked as we walked.
Well, it's just a mixed farm with beef cattle and sheep. The emphasis on beef cattle because that is certainly what suits the climate most in Orkney. However, here we have hills, and it is suitable for outrun for sheep and good for wintering the sheep on.
And this is a very old farm.
It is. Of course, it's not unique in that respect. But, I mean, we do know that it's been farmed continuous for over 1,000 years.
This one?
This one, yes, because it is actually mentioned in the sagas. Not as Redland, but as Renaland. And it is believed it is one and the same.
So do you think cattle have always been reared in this farm then?
Oh, yes, oh, certainly, because the evidence is clear here that there you can see where the thatch has come up underneath the eaves and whereas now there's a tin roof. So that would have certainly been a byre. And all the old buildings have similar pieces on them, and there is the evidence of cattle all over.
And what length of time are we talking about?
Well, let's say in this instance, this house itself is about 400 years old. It, of course, obviously would have had chimneys, which I remember on the house, and it had a thatch roof with the flagstones underneath. So the insulation, in a way, was quite good. And also the original rafters are still there underneath that present roof. And this small window here is the original size of the windows, whereas the bigger ones had been put in later.
Is that a coat of arms I'm seeing?
Yes, it is, in fact. I found that when I was a boy. It had been built into the milldam wall just as a building stone, and I found it by accident. And I took a rubbing of that, and the information I got back from the Lion office in Edinburgh was that it was indeed a family stone, and it dated from 1526.
That's very close to when Orkney became part of Scotland.
Very much so. And in that context, the first Scot that is reputed to have come to Orkney was Watty Scott, and he had consistently in the past, of course living in the borders, he had raided into England, raided cattle and sheep and so on, but he got rather greedy and he started raiding into Scotland, and that was a crime. So he was arrested and tried in Edinburgh and found guilty and given the option, a rather nice option of either execution or exile. And he very wisely chose exile. And so the Scots have been in Orkney ever since. They landed in Sandy, went to North Ronaldsay, and then came to the mainland here. And they've been in this vicinity since.
And is he an ancestor of yours?
Indeed.
Great. Now, I think I'd like to see some of the trees that you planted.
Yes, we can just walk up this way and we'll see them then.
Are you highly mechanised here?
Well, I wouldn't say highly mechanised, but we are. Like most farms in Orkney, we do have a fair amount of machinery. Coming round here, you'll see this stone byre here is not unique, of course, but it has the stone flags on the roof, as we call them, as slates. And you can imagine the weight of these.
Tremendous. Oh, right. That looks to be a very, very old one.
Well, it's 1848, it dates from. And interesting feature there is that there the rafters are held down, of course, by the weight of the roof. Whereas now, most buildings going up in Orkney have to have the rafters tied to the wall, just to cope with our weather conditions.
Right. Great to see some trees in a treeless country.
Well, I like trees too. And I had the advantage of having the old trees here initially, but they, I think, are maybe past their best. They're contemporary with the buildings we've just seen. And so I felt it was time that we planted more trees. And my whole family, of course, have been interested too. And they helped me to plant them and so on.
So how old are these?
Well, these are 6 years old, just planted from saplings. And you can see it's quite a variety.
Oh, it is. Yes. Hard and soft woods.
Yes. And a few colourful ones too, like the laburnums there, I've planted maples as well. So there is a general variety. Well, here, Tom, we come to the burn or redland. And this is, of course, where I've concentrated the planting of the trees.
Yes.
And on both sides of the burn. Of course, we have the moisture of the water too.
Great.
And the trees have obviously are doing no too bad.
You're doing very well.
Tell me something about the Udal laws that govern the rights here.
Well, they of course have ancient origins, Tom, and they existed in Orkney since the Vikings first landed. But they were strengthened greatly by Jarl Ronald when he built his great cathedral to St Magnus. And as you know, that was begun in 1137. And so it's 850 years old, and they still exist in Orkney. And in fact, in the parish of Harry is possibly the strongest surviving area. And it is the oldest surviving land ownership in Britain. As such, we are very proud of our heritage in that respect. Well, here, Tom, we come to the oldest dwelling house on the farm. It is the old house of Langalure, and it in itself is, we feel, a part of not only our family heritage, but it's part of Orkney's heritage too.
In what way?
Well, it has interesting family associations. And also, it has quite a remarkable story connected with it. In the 1780s, one of my ancestors, Bessie Corrigal, was born in that very bed. And how it came about was that it was a new married couple, and they were expecting their first baby, and the mother was in labour in that nuke bed. And you can imagine a roaster of a fire on here, a big peat fire. And for the occasion, all the local women were called in. And at that time, they were called Howdy women. And on this occasion, it was 11 of them arrived, all from the township of Redland here. And it turned out to be a difficult birth. And of course, it was fashionable. The father was put outside, out through the door there. But he was worried, as most expectant fathers would be. And he came back on frequent occasions to ask had the child arrived, and he was told it hadn't. And of course, because it was a difficult birth, they had no anaesthetic or any medical facilities then, so they gave the mother the only anaesthetic they knew, and that was ale. And in fact, they gave her in pretty liberal quantities. There was just one snag with that. The Howdy women themselves also took an equal amount. So I think their looking after the mother was a bit suspect. And however, the father came back, and eventually he was told that the child had just arrived. And he was met by a very long-faced woman, and she said the child was stillborn. And of course, he got a tremendous shock. And he said he wanted to see the little body. And they said, no. There's no way that you should, because you'll never have another child. But however, he pushed past this quite drunk, Howdy wife, and went through into the ben end there and lifted this little naked body off the sea bank. And there, when he took it into his arms, she cried. And it was looked upon as a great miracle.
Would you call yourself a conservationist, Ian?
Well, I think so. In fact, I am certainly not the only one. I would contend that every farmer in Orkney is a conservationist. For instance, when we're ploughing or cultivating the land, cutting grass, if we happen to see a bird's nest, we would never dream of destroying that. We would always go round it. And I think generally living on the land is an important thing when we have such ancient past as we do in Orkney. The pastures going uphill, of course, is only a relative apparent expansion of farming in Orkney. Under the peat, in several parts in Orkney, there is evidence of ploughing. And this would be, say, about contemporary with Skara Brae, or just after. And the peat had come in later than that. So really the peat and the heather hills is relatively new. When you have lived here all your life, and when your ancestors have lived here too, you know, in fact, it is only a repossessing of the land that was farmed in the past.
Nowadays, an Orkney farm has to be at least 100 acres to provide a modern standard of living. There are currently more sheep in the fields because prices for cattle are down. But the Orcadians have always had to be adaptable. They're hard workers, and the quality of their farm stock is their best advertisement.